You can provide emphasis on different points, or different points of your design, based on size and boldness and that kind of stuff. And this comes in handy even within body copy, or within a headline, because a lot of typography sort of mimics the way that we talk. Almost like punctuation, exclamation points, or question marks. You kind of, when you read those, you kind of can verbalize it in your head. Like, oh, this is going to be really loud if it's in all caps with an exclamation point. You can do the same thing by, making one word much larger, or putting it in bold. This all kind of this stuff makes sense. And those, if a word is, say the word is, we're going, say we're going to the firehouse. I know that's kind of a lame example, but it's the first thing that popped into my head. So, if you make "we're" much larger than the rest of the sentence, people are going to read it, we're going to the firehouse. Where if, going is much larger, you're going to read it as we're going to the firehouse. And, just these kind of, these language kind of things that you can think about. And you can almost recreate language the way somebody would say something just by altering the size and boldness and color of text. If you had fire exclamation point in bright bold red letters that are 20 feet high, that's going to sound like somebody's yelling fire. Whereas if it's small lowercase black letters, you would not read the urgency into that. So let's see. So that's kind of ways to create hierarchy in these visual systems, of organizing information. That's where typography really comes into play. On the flip side of that, type is, we kind of forget about this, but type is basically image. It's made up of letters, and letters are made up of lines and dots and all this kind of stuff, these basic elements. And so you can play with that. We talked about that a little bit last week about the larger text gets, the more you start to notice the flourishes of text, or the angles of the lines, and the boldness of certain letters, things like that. And you can really kind of play around with this, and you see a lot of people doing that these days. And it kind of reminds me of, I forget, some psychologist did an experiment where they had a paragraph of text, and all the words were jumbled up, but the first letter and the last letter of each word was in the same place, and the words and the letters in the middle of each word were jumbled, and people could still read it, like almost just as quickly as they would read it if the actual words were there. And that shows us that you can take away certain parts of something and it's still easily understood. So you see, in the way that applies to typography is you see a lot of ads these days where, or logos, for example, where they'll take away part of a letter. If there's supposed to be an opening, in the letter R, they might take away that opening so it's a solid block, but you still read it as an R. Or maybe, they take away, you don't see the entire word, they take away the bottom half of the word, but there's still enough information there where people can understand what that word is. They still read it. So that's just kind of visual play is what I call it. And you can really experiment with that and get some neat results. You can do the same thing by squishing letters together, or putting lines of type right next to each other where these letter forms combine into one larger kind of complex shape, and people can still read it, but it becomes more visually interesting because it becomes more of this this new shape that still has some meaning to it, if that makes sense. So that, a lot of different things you can do with typography. View it as an image. You can emphasize certain parts by arranging size, color, bold, font, all this kind of stuff, and then you can create a visual hierarchy to kind of organize the information and the way it's presented. Just like you would create hierarchy with one large black square to one small blue square, you can do the same thing with text. So that's pretty much all I wanted to talk about for the second part of this chapter. And I was thinking about this earlier today. Being an online class, this requires a lot more, I guess, motivation on your part, self-determination. And I got this book. I handpicked the book that we're using because I think it's really valuable information, and it kind of goes further in depth than I can in my little 20-minute lectures. So you only get out as much of this. You only get out from this class as much as you want to get out of it. Um, you can probably get by skimming through and not reading the book and just watching my lectures or whatever. But if you really, you can really get a lot more out of it if you read the book and look around and start noticing things. Look on the internet. Start noticing all the different design around you. If you're actively engaged in it, you're really going to get a lot more out of it, and you're going to learn a lot more. So, just thought I'd say that. Let's talk about our assignment for this week. I was kind of going back and forth on how I wanted to do this assignment because there's always it seems like there's a little bit lost in translation in this online format for this class because you guys don't really, a lot of you might not know the software yet, or there are certain things, doing sketches in class is different than doing sketches on your own and then scanning them and turning them in. So I'm always kind of experimenting with different assignments. But what we're going to do this time, I think, is I'm going to give you a passage from a book or magazine. I'm not sure yet. But there's going to be different parts of the passage. There's going to be a headline, some subheads, and then the body copy. And what I want you to do is and I'm going to give this to you in a Word file. Okay? I hate Microsoft Word, but we're going to use that because it's the easiest to use, and I'm pretty sure you all have Microsoft Word or some kind of word processing program on your computer. If you have InDesign or Quark or some kind of layout program like that and you know how to use it, you're welcome to use that instead. Copy the text and put it over there. But what we're going to do is you're going to do 5 different ways of formatting this passage that I give you. Still have this visual hierarchy where you see the headline, the subheads, where it's logically laid out. You can tell the difference between the certain parts. But I want you to do that in 5 different ways, and this is really going to get you to kind of push the envelope as far as how do I use these different tools to still create this visual hierarchy. Like maybe one way you use a bright color for the headline. Or a lighter color for the body copy or something like that. And then maybe one deals with size, one deals with placement. And you might want to play around with formatting the text differently. Maybe if there's a point of emphasis within the body copy, maybe you want to make that word really big or put it on its own line or create a pull quote. And you're free to use, sky's the limit. You can make this as avant-garde or as as normal as you want to. You can use lines, shapes maybe, bullets if you want to create a bullet list out of some of the information. If you want to use a pull quote and maybe separate that by using a different font. But keep in mind all these things that we talked about. You only want to use a few font families, 2 or 3 at the most. And then these different techniques that we have for creating hierarchy, size, color, value, placement, all this kind of stuff. So 5 different layouts of your type with the same passage. And if for some reason you don't have a program that you can do this in, Microsoft Word, there's a lot of different help menus if you want to figure out how to use a text box so you can make a pull quote or to adjust margins, you can do all that. If for some reason you're more comfortable doing it, a different way, you're welcome to print it out and, make a collage almost where you cut out the lines and, paste it that way. That's a little more labor intensive, but you might have different ways to experiment that way. So maybe that'll get you thinking. But whatever works for you, as long as we have 5 different ways of formatting this text. And when you turn it in, you can just turn it in as a Word document in 5 pages or however many pages it takes. But I just want to, encourage you to be as creative as you want. Really, make the headline 30 points and the text, 8 points or whatever. As long as it's still readable, because you still want to keep in mind that is the goal. Is you want this to be easily understood by the viewer, so they don't have to do too much work. Is trying to figure out like, oh, what's the important part? What's the headline? What's this about? So you want to make it understandable, but I want you to get as creative as possible with it. All right, I'll see you soon.